All right, here we are again. Okay, it looks like just about everybody's here, so why don't we get started? So last time we were working on supply and demand, and we are largely done with it, but I just want to go back and review a little bit to make sure everybody understands what we've been doing before we go on to chapter 5, which is coming next. So basically, in a nutshell, we were looking at the law of demand and the law of supply, and we had quite a few interesting graphs. So we started out with the demand curve, and we know that the demand curve is downward sloping. And that's because as the price of a good falls, people are willing to buy more of it. It's really just that simple. Okay. So at a high price, like let's say $10, let's say people are willing to buy 100 units of this product. At a price of 5, they might be willing to pay for 200 units. So that means that as we lower the price, people will buy more of the product. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's the right way to go, but it does mean that if we do cut the price, we can be sure that people will buy more units of the product. Now, we also mentioned that moving up and down the same curve like this, let's say from A to B, is referred to as a change in quantity demanded. Okay, quantity demanded. So this is only caused by a change in price. If the price changes and nothing else changes, we move up and down the same curve, and this is referred to as a change in quantity demanded, okay, caused by a change in price. And in terms of just geometry, if we change what's on the vertical axis in any graph, that will cause us to have to move up and down that same curve. Okay, so because everything else on this graph is being held constant, except for price, that means if the price changes, that means we have to be moving along to a new position on that same curve. And in economics, again, we call that a change in quantity demanded. Now, we saw that there's a lot of factors, though, that influence the demand for a product. In fact, let's go back and quickly review some of them. Let's see. There's about 6 of them. And we'd ideally like to understand in each case how a change in that variable or factor will cause the demand curve to shift around. So in other words, if anything other than the price changes, I'll make a note of that here. If anything other than the price changes, let's make that font a little bigger there. If anything other than the price changes, the relationship between price and quantity demanded will change. Of course it will. So this is reflected in a shift of the entire curve, not just a movement up and down the curve, but a shift in the entire curve. This is known as a change in demand. Now you got to be careful here. It's a very subtle distinction, a change in quantity demanded versus a change in demand. Okay, so that means the entire curve will shift. Now, of course, then there's really only 2 ways it can shift. It can shift to the right. A shift to the right is an increase in demand, while, of course, a shift to the left is a decrease in demand. So what we have to be able to do is look at all these different factors and really understand which ones shifted to the right and which ones shifted to the left. Okay, so that's important. So remember, there's a whole list of them here where what we're seeing is, like here, you can see there's 6 reasons why the curve might shift around. If any of these 6 variables or factors changes, the entire curve has to shift to reflect the change in this relationship between price and quantity demanded. So let's take a look at a few of them and remind ourselves how this would work. Let's say, for example, we're thinking in terms of the factors that cause an increase in demand. So first, let's draw a picture and see what that actually looks like. And it's very simple. You just shift the curve to the right. And so in order to keep track of which is which, we typically label this a D1 and D2. And the key detail here is that for any price, let's say, for example, the price previously at $10, people were willing to buy 100 units of this good. So now look what happens. At a price of 10, now all of a sudden people are willing to buy, let's say, 200 units of this good. All right, it's still the same price, and yet people are buying more of it. So what exactly is causing this? All right, so let's go through the factors and see which ones would actually cause this to happen. For example, let's see. Let's look at taste and preferences. Well, I think it makes sense that if people's taste for a product goes up or increases, then the demand curve could shift to the right. So, for example, an increase in tastes or preferences for the good. Okay, so a good example of this would be the demand for organic foods has increased significantly in the past few decades, let's say. Why? Well, because obviously people feel that it's healthier for them. And so all other things being equal, and we know if you've been to the store, you know that organic foods are more expensive than the rest of them, but people are apparently willing to pay extra for them. And so the demand curve has shifted to the right. So if you go to the store, you'll see a lot of organic products. 20 years ago, it would have been hard to find, or you would have had to go to a specialized store to find them. Now they're everywhere. You can go to any store and they'll have, organic, non-organic, whatever the case may be. So that would definitely do the job. How about consumer income? Now, here we have to be careful. For a normal good, an increase in consumer income will cause the demand curve to shift to the right. And if you recall, we defined a normal good as any good where higher incomes will cause us to want to buy more of that product. And we also showed that the majority of goods in the marketplace are in fact normal goods. In fact, it's hard to think of examples of what we call inferior goods because there aren't that many of them. And I'll just remind you that an inferior good, normal good, let's do that first, is one for which the demand increases as incomes rise. Most goods are normal goods. Okay, the vast majority of them. An inferior good is one for which the opposite happens, for which the demand decreases as incomes rise. Okay, we gave some simple examples, like, for example, generic drugs, cheap grades of gas, used textbooks, things like that, things that you only buy. Used clothes, if you went to the store and you buy used clothes, for example, anything used, really, when you come right down to it, could be defined as an inferior good. Sometimes you see advertised on Amazon, they'll have these high-tech products that are said to be, quote, refurbished, which who knows what that means, but they're offering to sell it to you for a very low price because who knows what you're actually getting. But if if your income is that low, that's the only option you have, you might just go ahead and buy it and take the risk. But if your income rises, certainly you'll not want to do that again. So if the good is normal and incomes are rising, the demand curve will shift to the right. On the other hand, if this is an inferior good, let's add that as a second possibility for an inferior good, the demand curve will shift to the right if incomes fall. So in other words, if the economy is in recession, you're going to see more and more people buying used products or generic drugs because, of course, they're worried that they can't afford to do any better, especially if they're worried about their jobs. So either for a normal good, the demand curve shifts to the right if we have higher incomes, For an inferior good, it's just the opposite. Okay, so an increase in the taste, that was the first factor. Incomes. Now, number three is the prices of related goods. Now, this one can potentially be very, very confusing. I think that in these cases, your best bet is to think of an example. If you're not sure, usually the best thing to do is think of an example from the real world. So with related goods, the two basic types are substitutes and complements. All right, so let's remind ourselves what these means. Substitute goods or substitutes are goods that satisfy the same needs. For example, Coke and Pepsi. They're not the same thing, although they're awfully close to each other. I mean, to a chemist, they'd be virtually identical to each other. What are they? They're cola, water, sugar, carbonation. Pretty much that's it. But there are subtle differences, enough that we can tell them apart. And some people prefer one or the other, but most people would take one or the other depending on what's available, or possibly which one is cheaper. Very few people are so rigid about this that they would only insist on having Coke or Pepsi. So, like you notice this, like you go to McDonald's, they only have Coke. If you go to Burger King, they only have Pepsi. If you go to Manhattanville, they only have Pepsi. If you go to Fordham, it's only Coke. It's usually one or the other is available, but in the supermarket, you could have either one of them. And what might guide your decision is how much they actually cost. If one of them is on sale, you might switch to that one. So they are considered to be more or less the same thing in the eyes of consumers, because they're both soft drinks and they both taste good. And what else can you ask for? Complements are goods that are consumed together, like French fries and ketchup. The ultimate example: French fries and ketchup. Who would want? I mean, I shouldn't say that. I mean, if the fries are good enough quality, you may not need the ketchup at all, as long as they're salted properly. But you certainly don't want to eat ketchup by itself. So they tend to go together. If you go to McDonald's and you order fries, they'll just automatically hand you ketchup packets because they're so sure that you actually want ketchup on your fries. In a foreign country, they might also give you other things like mayonnaise or mustard or something else, or even certain types of vinegars might go on there. But in the United States, it's pretty much always ketchup. God, they might even give you barbecue sauce in some countries. Who knows? But here it's ketchup. But so anyway, how does this work then? So, for example, if the price of Pepsi rises, the demand curve for Coke will shift to the right. Why? Because the Pepsi is now more expensive. And that's the bottom line. I mean, Pepsi's more expensive, people will buy more Coke. It's as simple as that. If Pepsi goes on sale, though, the demand curve for Coke would actually go to the left. Because now it's cheaper to buy the Pepsi, and some people at least will do that. As far as the complements go, if the price of ketchup, actually, let's put it this way: if the price of fries suddenly increases dramatically, let's say, due to a shortage of potatoes for some reason, the demand curve for ketchup will shift to the left. If the price of the fries decreases, and it doesn't have to be dramatically, let me take that out of there. I mean, it has to be enough that people actually notice it. But let's say if the price of the fries decreases due to a surplus of potatoes, the demand curve for ketchup will shift to the right. Because the logic there being that this is because people will buy more fries, and they will also buy more ketchup, to go with those fries. In other words, nothing happened to the conditions for in the market for ketchup. It's because of the potatoes that this demand for ketchup is changing, because they're complements. All right, so now how about expectations? Here we go. So the way that works, and people usually have some idea of what they expect to happen in the future. They may not actually turn out to be right, but they, depending on what they think might happen, people believe that the price of a good will rise in the future. They're likely to buy more, stock up on it today. In other words, they will buy more today, and the demand curve will shift to the right. Okay, and now they may not end up being correct, but the bottom line is that they think this might happen. That's good enough, and they'll just go ahead and start stocking up on it. It's like right now with this COVID thing going on, you notice that certain products kept disappearing, especially in the early days, because everybody jumps to the same conclusion. Well, we're going to run out of toilet paper, for example, and so people are hogging it, buying years worth of it just to make sure they don't run out. And so this is what happens. But here, this is just the price of the good based on its our expectations of its future price. So they'll affect their buying patterns today because they think something will change in the future. The number of consumers. Okay, if the number of consumers in the market for a good increases, the demand for the good will increase. Of course it will, because there's more people. And the demand curve will shift to the right. Okay, so for example, as the US population grows, the demand for Coke increases. It's just that simple. There's more people to drink the Coke, and everybody likes Coke, more or less. So there's more people, there's more demand for Coke. That's the bottom line. All right, and then this last one, expected future income. Yes, okay. If people believe that their future income will be higher than it is now, they will likely buy more products today, especially expensive products like cars. Why? Because they feel like they can afford it, or they will be able to afford it. So they decide, why not? Why wait? Why not just go get that new car today? What the heck? I'll have more money in the future. This is like an example of people who just graduated from school. I mean, you've been surviving for 4 years with very little money. And you figure, well, when I start working, I'll need a car. So why wait till I get that job? Why don't I just buy it today? I mean, you got to be careful. Of course, that job might not materialize for 6 months, but this is how people might decide to go ahead and buy these expensive products. Plus, let's face it, people are impatient. If you want something, you want it now. You don't want it in 6 months, you want it now. So if you have any excuse to do it now, you're going to take it, or at least many people feel that way. So therefore, when people believe that their incomes will rise, which is likely to happen, even like people already have jobs, if the economy is really booming, they may start to expect raises from their jobs, and they may turn around and buy more products even before those raises actually materialize. So when people in general, when people believe that their incomes will rise, they will buy more products, like I said, and the demand curve for these products will shift to the right. Okay, and again, they may turn out to be wrong. It doesn't matter. The fact is that if they believe this is going to have a strong influence on their market behavior. Because we can't predict the future, but we still think we know what might happen, and that's the best we can do. So if you reverse all of these, if you have a decrease in demand, which you would show by a leftward shift of the curve, then everything just works in reverse. Okay, you just shift it back to the left. To the left always means a decrease. Yes, they are. As soon as we're done, I'm going to post these on Blackboard. That's why I'm doing them in Word so that I can save it. In fact, I'm glad you reminded me. I'm going to save this right. You notice how it says document? That means if lightning hits my house right now, I'm going to lose this document. So let me attend to that right now. You know how computers are. As soon as you forget to save something, that's when the computer craps out on you. And you know that. I'm sure you've all had that experience. That it knows somehow that you are taking a chance and says, wait a minute, here's an opportunity to cost somebody their work. I'll call this chapter 4 review notes. Yeah, this way you don't have to write down every single word. Okay, there we go. All right, it's saved. We're safe. Okay, so, this is meant to represent a decrease in demand, which is a leftward shift. And that, of course, has to be caused by something other than price changing. So, whereas, let's say, previously at $10, people were willing to buy 100 units of this product. Now, all of a sudden, they're only willing to buy 50. The entire curve is shifting to the left because one of these factors has changed. So we don't have to go through all the factors all over again. We just need to note that this is caused by reversing the factors that caused an increase in demand. For example, let's just list a few of these. A decrease in tastes, a decrease in incomes for a normal good, or an increase in incomes for an inferior good. A decrease in the price of substitutes. Oh boy. Or an increase in the price of complements, like the fries and the ketchup. Okay, I better double check. I want to make sure I'm doing it in the same order if I can help it. So it tastes, incomes, prices of related goods, expectations. Okay. The price of the good is expected to fall in the future. Why is that? Because, in other words, people will wait to buy it until the price decline actually materializes. So in other words, here's like with some types of products, they go through a cycle, like iPhones. If you don't absolutely have to have the latest version, you can often save a lot of money. Like for example, right now the 12 just came out. So if you wait a while, you could probably get a really sweet deal on the 11, because eventually Apple will want to get rid of them, clean out their inventory, and only carry 12s. And so this happens every time, and it's like every year they go through this cycle. The old version starts to get cheaper and cheaper. They start having promotions so that they can promote the new one. And so if you're careful and you wait, and you, like I said, you don't absolutely have to have the newest version every year. You can save money by waiting until this actually happens. So when they start advertising, we've got some 11s left over. Do you want one? We'll give it to you cheap. This is what's actually happening. All right, so then we had, if the number of consumers in the market declines, And this happens. Some Western European countries, the population is actually shrinking. And so in a country like that, like Greece, for example, you might find that the demand for Coke is declining simply because there are fewer people. Or else, like in this case of California, a lot of people are moving out of California, New York too, for that matter. And so in those local markets, you might find less demand for Coke. And then finally, expected, if future income and or credit are expected to decline. So in other words, if you're worried about your job disappearing, then that would not be the time to be spending a lot of money. So all of these factors would cause a leftward shift of the curve. And you notice they're just the opposite of what we had before. All right, tastes go down. Like for tobacco, we discussed this. We have less income to spend on normal goods, and then we turn to inferior goods. But here, if our incomes go up, we'll buy less inferior goods. If substitutes become cheaper, like if Pepsi goes on sale, we'll buy less Coke. Compliments, remember the ketchup and the fries. If potatoes become terribly expensive, we'll buy less ketchup. Okay, so this is all pretty straightforward. Now, all of this applies to the curve as well. We have to make a distinction between the two basic cases. One, where the supply curve will move up and down. And by the way, let's mention here that the demand, I guess I verbally said this before, the demand curve is downward sloping because as prices fall, people are willing to buy more of the good. It's just that simple. So that should have really come first. Let me see if I can find space for that. Let's see. All right, I'll sneak it up here. I would ideally like this all to be in some logical sequence. So let's get that up there. This is really the beginning where we want to understand why the demand curve actually has that shape. So we'll sneak this in here. And then that logically follows, if the price changes, then we'll move along the same curve. But if anything else changes, the entire curve shifts. All right, perfect. Now we're going to do the same thing for the supply curve. The supply curve is different because this is coming from the producers of the good, and they are just trying to make money. Consumers are trying to maximize their satisfaction from every dollar that they spend. So with the supply curve is upward sloping because as the price of the good rises, it becomes more profitable to sell the good. So more goods, more units of the good will be made available to the market. Okay, so in other words, we're seeing an opportunity to increase our profits. Why not? Okay, so if you are, let's say you're a farmer who grows organic foods, and suddenly you realize there's people love this stuff, you're going to grow more organic foods. It's just that simple. So therefore, the curve ends up looking like this. Upward sloping with the same axes. All right, so I mean, we can think of this in terms of organics. Let's say these are organic tomatoes. If the price is $2 a pound, we'll produce 100. We're a small farmer, let's say. We'll produce 100 pounds of tomatoes. If the price jumps up to $4, then we'll go out and increase that to 200, let's say, because we're making more money on each pound of tomatoes. Very good. All right, so this is how supply works. Now, we want to make a note that if the price of the good changes, as we saw here, what's going to happen, let's say we start at point A and we move ourselves to point B. If the price changes, there will be an increase in the quantity supplied, or actually what I should say, just to be more general, if the price changes, there will be a change in the quantities supplied. Okay, so this is exactly what we saw with the demand curve, except now it's supply. In other words, we have to be very careful with this. Let me label this. This represents a change in quantities supplied. Okay, the terminology is exactly the same as it was for the demand curve. Moving up and down the curve means a change in quantity supplied. This is caused, or this can only be caused, by a change in price. A change in price. Anything else, if anything else changes, like with the demand curve, the entire curve will shift. Okay, and we're going to see many examples of that. And of course, we're going to go back to the slides and confirm. We're going to see there were 5 factors for the supply curve. So if any factor other than price changes, the entire relationship between price and quantity supplied will change. This is referred to as a change in supply. Okay, so this is exactly what we saw before with demand. The entire curve shifts. Let's say from here to here, or possibly from here to here. That means the entire curve is shifting. Okay, it could go to the right, it could go to the left. If we go to the right, this is an increase in supply. And this is a decrease in supply. Okay, so remember, always a shift to the right is an increase, a shift to the left is a decrease. And you can tell why, because you can see the quantities are increasing when we move to the right and they're decreasing when we move to the left. So that's why this is happening. To the right means increase, to the left means decrease for both supply and demand. All right, now what factors can cause, let's start by asking what factors can cause an increase in supply. Okay, so we'll go back to the factors that we had in the slides and we'll go through them one at a time. These are a little bit less intuitive, I think, because we're consumers. We don't normally produce goods and services, but we have to think in terms of the producer, who is a profit maximizing organization. Even if it's a nonprofit, they have to pay attention to their revenues and their costs. They can't just ignore that altogether. Yes, they're not trying to make a profit, but boy, it would be nice if they do. All right, now I got to find it. Oh, here it is. Here it is. So here we go. We start with productivity. And here we go. So an increase in productivity lowers the cost of production and therefore increases supply. All right, because lower cost of production increases our profits. Now, there's a lot of reasons why productivity can go up. Productivity can increase for many reasons, such as, buying more advanced equipment. Let's say that you're a farmer and you are growing those organic tomatoes and your old equipment is getting very, let's say, beat up, and you buy some new equipment and all of a sudden you can grow a lot more tomatoes than ever before because you have this brand new spectacular equipment that you didn't have before. Improving or increasing the training of employees. Okay, let's say you've got a bunch of people working there. The more you train them, The more skills you give them, the more productive they can be. How about using better methods to produce the product? Right, that could be a lot of things. But there's a lot of reasons why this can happen. And of course, the goal here is to make sure that the cost of producing our product is as low as possible. So businesses are constantly looking for better ways to do what they're doing because it will ultimately lower their cost of production. It also may improve the quality of the product too. And so all of this combines to give us a higher supply of the product. Okay, so a shift to the right in this case would be caused by higher productivity. Number two, input prices. When input prices, such as wages, the costs of raw materials, etc., decrease, then it becomes more profitable to produce a product and the supply will increase. Okay. So let's say, for example, suppose that the fertilizer used to produce the tomatoes, and yes, they have to have fertilizer, otherwise they won't grow, becomes much cheaper, then more tomatoes will be supplied to the market. Just because it's more profitable. One of my biggest costs has gone down. And so therefore I can afford to produce more tomatoes, and therefore I will. Remember, the goal here is to make money. The prices of good related production include or consist of substitutes in production and complements in production. So it's hard to find examples of complements in production, but substitutes are easy. For example, if the farmer is growing both organic tomatoes and carrots, and these are considered to be substitutes in production because they can both be produced with the same resources. It's just a question of which one do you want to plant. Now I don't know anything about farming, but I'm assuming that they both grow in more or less the same weather conditions. I'm assuming that if you're in like Ohio, let's say, or Iowa or Illinois, if you're able to grow tomatoes, you should be able to grow carrots. And so the one you choose will ultimately depend on what the market prices are. So if the price of carrots falls, the farmer will increase the supply of tomatoes because they're more profitable than carrots. Now the complements in production are products that are produced at the same time, I guess we could say. For example, I think I mentioned this example when oil wells are drilled. They often contain natural gas, so that natural gas and crude oil could be considered to be complements in production. So in other words, when you drill for one, you drill for the other. Okay, so in a case like this, if the price of natural gas increases, even if the price of oil hasn't changed, it makes sense to drill for more oil because the resulting natural gas is worth more and is therefore more profitable. Okay. This means that when the price of natural gas rises, the supply of crude oil will also increase. Yeah, and I think I also mentioned this example of heavy cream. I'm not sure if I did or I didn't. If you've ever seen whole milk actually being produced, you probably didn't realize it, but when you go to the supermarket, you can buy whole milk, you can buy 2%, you can buy 1%, you can buy heavy cream, you can buy light cream. Ultimately, all of those are coming from the same milk. It's just a question of separating them out from each other. You know, if you let milk sit long enough, it'll actually separate itself out in the sense that the heavy cream actually rises to the top. And you can actually split it off and sell it separately as a different product. So in that case, since heavy cream is part of whole milk, a farmer who is producing whole milk is also simultaneously producing heavy cream without, you don't have to go out of your way to make it. It's already there. You just have to strip it off. You can put it in machines and they'll split it up into the component parts. So therefore, heavy cream and whole milk could be considered to be complements in production. Therefore, if the price of heavy cream rises, the supply of milk will also rise, because the farmers want to capture that market too. They see that people are willing to pay more for the heavy cream, so they're happy to supply more milk because the heavy cream is part of that. Okay, so that's that one. Now, how about expectations? Okay, so corporations, or businesses or sellers, I guess we'll say, have expectations about the future price of their good, just like consumers do. Here, though, remember, they're trying to maximize their profits. If sellers believe that the price of the good will fall in the future, they will likely produce more today in order to sell it before the price falls. Because, let's say you're a tomato farmer and you have a reason to believe that in the future the supply of tomatoes will be enormous, the price will drop. So you want to sell them now while they're still reasonably expensive. Okay, so now, of course, you still might be wrong, but if you really believe this, you're likely to affect the amount of tomatoes that you produce. And then finally, there was one more, number of sellers, of course. If the number of sellers increases, the supply of the good will increase. It has to. For example, if more farmers decide to grow organic tomatoes, the supply will increase. It's just that simple. Farmers say, people love these organic tomatoes. Maybe we should be in this market too. And there you go. Before you know it, there's a lot more tomatoes available. So a decrease in supply, which is shown by a leftward shift of the supply curve, would be caused by a reversal of all of these factors. For example, if the number of sellers falls, the supply will decrease. It's that simple. Now, realistically, the only one of these factors that we can't reverse, though, if you look at them very carefully, productivity doesn't actually ever go backwards, does it? It only improves. The only time productivity has ever really gone backwards was during the Dark Ages. Remember, after the fall of the Roman Empire, humanity actually forgot a lot of what the Romans developed. In fact, for example, cement the Romans invented cement, and then the knowledge was just lost, and it had to be reinvented during the Middle Ages because nobody remembered how it worked. But normally productivity only increases. All these others can go in either direction. So if we reverse all of these factors that I've just shown you, the supply curve will shift to the left. Okay, so we don't need to go through them all over again, but just be aware that whatever causes the curve to shift to the right, the opposite will cause it to shift to the left. All right, now all of these curves are going to be brought together to discover something very important called equilibrium. Okay, so equilibrium occurs when the quantity supplied of a good exactly matches the quantity demanded. And we can see that by drawing the curves. And of course, this is where you're going to get a lot of practice. Oops. So this is called equilibrium right here. Let's label this E for equilibrium. And we'll call this, let's say, P star and Q star to indicate these are the equilibrium levels. And you notice that this is where the curves cross. The quantity supplied equals the quantity demanded. Now, that's not true at any other point, as you can see. For example, if the price is way up here somewhere for some reason, let's call this P, I don't know, PH for high. It's too high. What's going on up here? Well, you can see the supply curve is further to the right than the demand curve, which means the quantity supplied is greater than the quantity demanded. Now, that's not good. This situation can't persist because there's an imbalance between the quantity supplied and the quantity demanded. And we call this situation a surplus. The producers are going to see this and they're not going to want to continue producing this much. And they'll realize too that they've charged a price that's simply too high. The good that they're producing is piling up on the shelves because it's just too expensive. So very wisely, they will start to cut back on the price. And as they do, as we move down these two curves, lower price means more people will buy the product, but we will cut back on our production. When do we stop cutting the price? When we reach equilibrium. Okay, so once we get back here, there's no need to further lower the price. So there will be this adjustment period taking place where the sellers are trying to find the right price that consumers are happy with. And if it's possible to produce at a profit, they're going to do that. But if they inadvertently set the price too low, let's call this PL for low, then they'll notice that the good is flying off the shelves and there's none left when customers come to the store. So here, actually, we don't need these lines here. Here we have the opposite situation. We call this a shortage because down here, it's the other way around. The quantity that we're producing is not enough to satisfy everybody's demand. And so here we call this a shortage. And you've seen this happen. You know, something goes on sale, everybody snaps it up, you get to the store and it's all gone. This is what we call a shortage, and the lower price is responsible for it. So now what they do is say, well, you know, why don't we raise the price? If people want it that much, and in the process, slowly, less people buy the product, but more of it is being produced, and eventually we'll find ourselves back here at equilibrium. So we can say that equilibrium, when a market is not in equilibrium, there is an automatic tendency for the market to return to equilibrium. Okay, the price adjusts until equilibrium. is restored. Now, this may happen very quickly. It may take a while. It depends on the particular product. All right. For some products, like in a supermarket, the prices change pretty quickly anyway. So, they realize one day, oops, we charge the price too low for all these cans of beans. Maybe we should raise the price and we won't have this problem anymore. It's pretty easy. But if you're talking about like expensive products like TVs, for example, it could be a while before this adjustment takes place. But it will happen eventually. It's automatically going to happen because the producers have an incentive to make sure the price is at equilibrium. The consumers are just reacting to the prices that they see. So because of this, we say that markets are self-correcting. You may hear this term in the sense that, in other words, surpluses and shortages will disappear as prices adjust. So prices are an important source of information for a business. So this is a separate discussion, but I'll just throw this in here. For business, they can provide a good sense of how much consumers are willing to pay for a good. So this is how we know that we made a mistake. The shelves are empty or the shelves are bursting with this product. So, we decide that now maybe the price is not where it needs to be, and we just keep adjusting it until we find the right one. In fact, this is one of the reasons why stuff keeps going on sale in supermarkets. They're trying to find the right price. They're not sure how much people are willing to pay for these products, so they keep tinkering with the prices until they find the right one. Yeah, that's, because in the supermarket, people are very, very sensitive to prices, as you can imagine, because if I go in the store and I discover that beans are suddenly more expensive, I'll switch to something else because everything I want is right there anyway. So yeah, people are very, very observant about prices in a supermarket setting, whereas in other cases, maybe not so much. Like if you go into a Starbucks to buy coffee and you suddenly notice the price went up by a quarter, you're not going to walk out of the store and say, oh, never mind, I don't want it. It's not important enough to worry about it because you're there for the coffee and that's it. But in a supermarket, there's so much competition for your dollars that they've got to be careful to make sure the prices are just right. And so it's a constant process. It's a constant adjustment process because market conditions do change very quickly. All right, now that leads us up to our next discussion. What happens if our supply or demand changes? So we're going to look at that next. We need to consider what happens in a market to the equilibrium price and quantity when there's a change in supply or demand. So for example, let me fix this. We'll start with demand. We say that initially we're in equilibrium. And what I'm proposing to do here is change the demand curve. So let's call this point 1 so we can keep track of the changes. P1, Q1, B1, equilibrium point 1. Let's call that 1. Now, let's say the demand curve shifts to the right. So what's happened here is that there's an increase in demand. And by shifting the demand curve to the right, you notice where it crosses with the existing supply curve, the price has gone up. I'll indicate that with a little arrow, and the quantity has also gone up. So in other words, it's true that people want more of this good, but because the supply hasn't changed, they can have more of that good, but only if they're willing to pay a higher price for it. So if we suddenly decide we must have more organic products, that's fine, but we have to expect to pay more for it. Okay, the farmers will produce it for us, but it's going to cost more. So at the same time, though, If the opposite occurs, now the great thing about these graphs is it's easy to see that if I decrease the demand, everything will simply work in reverse. So in fact, why don't I draw a separate curve for this? So this is the increase. If I want to decrease the demand for some reason, all I have to do is shift the curve back to the left, and you'll see that everything is now backwards from what I just did. All right, so let's try that. So wherever we started out, D1, let's call that 0.1, P1 and Q1. Now suddenly, ooh, people don't want this product as much as they used to. They'll buy less of it and the price will decline. All right, so this is a decrease in demand. This could be tobacco, for example. And that means that the curve shifts to the left. And the consequence of this is that both the price and quantity decline. People don't want as much of the product. Now, in the case of tobacco, the price didn't actually decline for cigarettes because taxes on those cigarettes were increased massively. But in a normal free market, if the demand for a product starts to decline, the price will actually drop. Because the sellers keep the same price, they'll end up with a huge surplus, and they don't want that. All right, so you can see these are just exactly the opposite of each other. And always remember, an increase means you move to the right, and a decrease means you move to the left. Now let's look at supply. Supply can change too. So if we start out with this graph, this time I'm going to change the supply curve. So let's see what happens now. We start with an equilibrium point here. And I'll shift to the right. Let's say technology improves and I can produce more of my product at a lower price or cost. Ooh, look what happened now. This is what I'd like to see. Yeah, look at that. Oops, wait a minute. I messed up my old diagram. So we're familiar with this case because this is what keeps happening to high-tech products like iPhones and laptops. There's an increase in supply because of technology, which continuously improves, especially in those areas. And you can see that the result of this is that the price went down and the quantity went up. So everybody's happy now because they're getting more of the product at a lower price. Wow, that's nice. This is what we like to see as consumers, and the producers too, because they're probably making more profits than they even were before due to the lower cost of producing the product. So this is basically the best case scenario. We'd love to see increases in supply, and this is again driven ultimately by productivity. So when you hear in the news that productivity growth is going up, you should be cheering because it means that your standard of living is going to go up at some level because products will become less expensive and you'll be able to have more of them. Okay, now of course, if I reverse this, let's say for some reason I'm that tomato farmer and all of a sudden the cost of my fertilizer gets very expensive for some reason. Oh no, the cost of making these tomatoes is going up and I have to cut back on my output. So this is the opposite scenario. This is what we do not like to see. A decrease in supply is the worst case scenario for everybody. Because watch what happens. Sadly enough, oh no, look what's going to happen here. When I shift the supply curve to the left, oh, I'm losing some of my output and the price is going up. So I have to pay more money for smaller quantity of this good. So I go to the store and there's hardly any organic tomatoes available, and the ones that are there are terribly expensive. And this happens when the cost of inputs changes. Like, for example, recently there was a huge shock to the supply of vanilla. The countries where vanilla grows in Africa were having some kind of problem. I suppose it was the weather. I don't remember all the details. And all of a sudden, vanilla became really, really expensive. And that impacts a lot of things that you might want to buy, like cakes, for example. So it happens. And by the way, this is a very unpleasant outcome. Sometimes in economics, this type of situation is referred to as a supply shock. And it's meant in a very bad way. A shock meaning there's a sudden dramatic increase in the cost of production, which causes this situation where the price goes up and the quantity also goes down. And so we hope this doesn't happen, because this is obviously a real problem for everybody. All right. So I think that in a nutshell, this is pretty much everything that we did. Let me see if I left something out. I don't think so. The only difference is here I have actual numbers. No, I believe that's everything. Well, that's good. So the reason why I'm spending so much time on this is because this is really, like I said, the most important topic in all of economics. Everything in economics ultimately comes down to supply and demand. This is the heart and soul of everything that economists do. There's really no question in economics that can't be answered by looking at supply and demand. So like I said, I'll be posting these notes, which I hope will increase your understanding of these topics. And if not, we'll do it all again. Okay. So, all right. So I'll post this when we're done. In the meantime, we've got a little time left. Why don't we start to take a peek at the next chapter, which is a bit of an extension of what we're doing here. It also is based on supply and demand, but the motivation is a little different. We're analyzing, well, let's take a step back. We know that, I'll sneak this in here. We know that if the price of a good rises, the quantity demanded will fall. And if the price of the good falls, the quantity demanded will rise. In this chapter, we will be considering the following question. How much will the quantity demanded change in response to a price change? Okay, so this is something we haven't considered before. We know that when the price goes up, people will buy less of the product, but it turns out that the strength of this result is not always the same. For certain types of goods, actually I'll continue with this. For certain types of goods, consumers are extremely sensitive to price changes, and they will cut back on what they will buy. And the quantity, let's put it this way, the quantity demanded will fall significantly when the price goes up, let's say. For other types of goods, consumers are not very sensitive at all. And the quantity demanded will fall slightly when the price increases. Okay, so in other words, the responsiveness of consumers to price changes is not the same under all circumstances. So let me give you a couple of examples. I hope that will illustrate this. For example, if the price of a, let's say, $2,000 computer rises by 10%, this could lead to a significant reduction in demand. Sorry, quantity demanded. Now, 10% is not a lot, but if you notice, even though 10% is not a huge percentage, it still translates into a price increase of $200. That's a lot of money. Okay, so if you're planning on buying, let's say, a MacBook Pro and you thought the price was $200, you go to the Apple store and they're like, well, sorry, it went up to $2,200. You might just change your mind and say, you know what, maybe that can wait. Maybe I'll just try something else. On the other hand, let's say that if the price of a $2 coffee in Starbucks increases by 10% to $2.20, there will be a very small reduction in the quantity demanded. Why is that? Even though this is also 10%, the actual dollar change is only 20 cents. And so therefore, the response to this change will be much smaller than for the price increase for the computer. Okay, does that make sense to everyone? It's still 10%, but it's only 20 cents. Nobody's gonna, I mean, a few people might switch over to something else. They might say, well, then give me the tea or something, but it's not going to have a huge impact on most people. Like it's, 10%, but it's 20 cents. The computer is a very different matter, isn't it? That's $200. That's a lot of money any way you look at it. So the elasticity measure that we're defining in this chapter is an attempt to capture how sensitive consumers are to changes in market prices and other variables as well, as we'll see. So this is more computational than theoretical. But it turns out that this is a very important concept, especially for businesses. They need to know this number because it'll help them decide the profit maximizing price to charge for their product. So we'll see how as we go along. So I just want to mention that we're going to consider 3 different types of elasticity in this chapter. Let me just show you their names. The most important one is called the price elasticity of demand, which is what we were just describing. But we also can define what's called the income elasticity of demand, which tells us how sensitive our demand is to changes in our income, obviously. And then this last one, cross elasticity, essentially what's happening here is we're considering how much we might change our consumption when the price of a related good changes. Okay, so we're going to go through all 3 of these in great detail. And there's some calculations, so I hope you have a good calculator, or if not, you can use the iPhone calculator, which, if you didn't know, let me just show this to you real fast. If you all have an iPhone, I'm guessing, or something similar to that. What you may not have noticed is that if you look in here, there's an app that comes with it. Let me just see. No, all that glare. You can't see anything with this. Hold on. There we go. See that little icon there, the little calculator? If you click it on, you get this very basic little calculator. You might say, oh, pfft. But if you flip it on its side, all of a sudden it turns into this very sophisticated scientific calculator. So if you didn't know it was here, well, this is your lucky day, because you don't need to buy a calculator now because you have this thing. You just have to learn how to use it. And of course, all calculators are slightly different, so you can't assume that it's, well, let's just say it may not always be completely self-explanatory. So, but you do need to have a calculator, especially if you're planning on taking more economics classes. So Anyway, so because it's getting pretty close to the end here, I don't want to start this topic because it's fairly complicated and then have to pick it up and start all over again. But I did want to introduce it to you so you can understand where we're heading in this chapter. So why don't we knock it off here? And so what I'd like you to do is between now and Monday, or Tuesday rather, is make sure you understand what we've been doing up to this point. Flip to the slides, go through this document that I just created, and maybe start reading chapter 5 just so that you're all ready for what's coming next, which is our discussion about elasticity. Now, at some point, I'm also going to start handing out problem sets, not to be collected, but just for the practice. Because, like anything else, we have to practice to get good at this stuff. So, but that can wait till next week. For today, it's Friday. Oh my God, the weekend is here. So what I want you to do is go home and enjoy it. Well, you're already home, but enjoy the weekend. But make sure that when we come back on Tuesday, you're very clear about everything that we've done today. All right. So unless there's any last minute questions, I'll see you all next Tuesday. Oh, here we
Thank
go.
you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes. Bye. All right. Everyone have a nice weekend. Bye.